Okay, welcome to Dive into World Building. Today we are talking about modesty, and we're starting a little bit late because I was rescuing my son from a terrible fate. No. um, so anyway, sorry we're starting late, but I think it should be a fun topic. I wanted to start by talking about what modesty means. It actually has a bunch of different meanings. So, yeah. Meanings that we know it has. Covering yourself with clothes. That's one. I suppose that's sort of on a par with the sensitivity about showing off, I guess. That's a more general thing, sensitivity about showing off.
Yeah, those are different, I think.
I think that might be actually. I think sensitivity about showing off might be the commonality between the two in a way. Just depends on what we're showing off.
Yeah.
So you know, not being really arrogant, I guess, would be another meaning of modesty. They're all. This is the kind of word that I love because it's just so socially fraught. More fun.
Well, I'm also thinking about body language, like not making eye contact.
Yep.
Which is, again, to me, the clothing thing is more explicitly sexual.
Okay.
Whereas the like not making eye contact or bowing or backing away, you know, that class of things is more power.
Uh-huh.
And then the not showing off is another dimension. Not quite sure what to call it.
Yeah, the meaning of modest is just like an adjective. You know, you talk about modest means.
Yeah.
That's yet another meaning. And it just means not very extremely high or, yeah, not extravagant, I guess. I mean, I think they're all related on a really basic conceptual level. But the way that they are applied, obviously, is going to depend a lot on context. So, yeah, not showing off, whatever it happens to be that you might show off, your wealth, your body, your opinion.
In my humble opinion is how it goes. But is that similar in
well, I don't know
if it works?
Opinion. I think in some sense, when I'm thinking about showing off your opinion, I guess it's showing off your power in some way. I guess that's what it is. Power with the eye contact thing. Avoiding eyes as a form of modesty. I mean, I know it is, right?
Yeah, it's like not challenging power.
Not challenging, right.
Of asserting your lower status.
Right.
By not challenging someone of higher status.
Yeah. Very interesting. So, it's well, so this is exactly the kind of thing that I like to play with in secondary worlds. I like to, and actually, you know what? I don't feel free to play around with it in the real world or in, you know, evocations of real world settings. But at the same time, the real world has lots of variations. Culturally, modesty is very important, but varies widely. And so there are so many possible values of what is modest and what is considered modest that you can really, you know, go to town. You can go to town, as they say, in fiction. But I don't see a lot of people playing with it in their worlds as much. So let's think of examples. I can think of an example of okay, well, so any world that takes as its inspiration a particular type of Earth culture will have similar values for modesty, I guess, imported with it. So if you're looking at you know, clothing styles in something like Saladin Ahmed's Throne of the Crescent Moon, it's going to generally follow a pattern that models the Persian sort of background with the culture, right? So I don't think, it's not that people aren't dealing with it, right? But it is something that's probably easier to import with a set of expectations from a particular culture. Anne Leckie has a really interesting modesty thing going on in her book, both of her books, Ancillary Justice and Ancillary Sword, where the Radkai like to keep their hands covered. And, you know, playing a musical instrument is considered risque because you would either you'd either have to not be wearing gloves, which would be, or you would have to wear such thin gloves that it would hardly be like wearing gloves at all, right?
Right.
And it's a sign of modesty if you are Radkai, and if you're not Radkai, it's a sign of your lack of civilization.
Okay, she obviously never performed in marching band in the winter. Gloves with the fingertips cut off.
Well, I'm just quoting from the I recall, you know, that the gloves would have to be so thin that it would just be so, risque, right? But it's fun. I'm on a hangout, hun. So, let's see. I'm going to write down what I just said.
Well, and going for a much older example, Darkover.
Okay.
The women were expected to keep the back of their neck covered. So they're supposed to wear their hair down in such a way that it covered the back of their neck.
Okay.
So again, a very specific body part being designated as too intimate for anyone to see.
But hair was enough to make it modest?
Some about a specific type of hair clasp that gathered the hair at the back of the neck.
Because a lot of systems, either religious or cultural, required that hair be covered. So that's interesting.
Well, and you just go historically, even within Western culture, there were times when, at least in society, women could wear very low-cut dresses that exposed really their whole shoulders and half of their breasts. But they couldn't show, their ankles had to be.
Yeah.
The entire leg down to the ankle had to be covered.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because it's almost like there's a sort of iconicity to certain parts of the body in this modesty question, right? you know, here's an example, another historical example. If you look at racy paintings, if you look at racy paintings from ancient times, European racy paintings tend to show everything except the critical parts, right? If you look at racy paintings from Japan, they show nothing but the critical parts.
Huh. Interesting. Okay.
Oh dear, I'm giving Glenda a cough.
Unfortunately, I've had this cough for a while.
Oh.
Yeah. So yeah, but seriously, the ukiyo-e paintings of the courtesans, etc. It's very interesting. They're all wearing clothes, but you can see very clearly what's going on, right? And that always struck me as odd, you know. Well, that was unexpected because, you know, how much of it is considered art / considered safe, and how much of it is considered the risque part, you know? It's a very interesting question. And then oh, the eye contact thing. Okay. So one of the things that I learned about when I went to the Musée d'Orsay in Paris is the way that the Impressionists changed the way nudes were drawn or painted, right? That you had this whole history of women being painted naked as goddesses, okay? And they could be in all kinds of bizarre and extreme wild contortions and this, that, and the other, right? But they were never looking at you. You were always kind of catching them in the act of something, right? And then you had, for example, the painting called Olympia, where she was lying on a bed, naked except for her slippers, and looking right at you. And that was considered absolutely scandalous. Immodest, really. But I think one of the things about it was that the immodesty didn't come from the body in those cases. It came from the visual challenge, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm doing this on purpose.
Yeah, almost as if the older paintings were catching someone unawares.
Yeah.
Whereas when she's making eye contact, she knows that she's being painted in that pose.
And she's in control of the situation, too.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it has some of these male gaze versus female gaze and who's in control of the situation questions that come up.
Yeah.
Because if she's looking at you, that means she's aware of what's going on, and she's like, yep, here I am, naked. Yeah, handle it. Right?
Yeah.
The feeling, the attitude is very, very different. And then there's also the way that in the same period people started not just drawing nudes, but actually, or doing art of nudes, but just actually doing art of particular people nude, not changing them to be, the platonic ideal of femininity or whatever, but clearly the way these paintings looked, it was actual human beings whom you might meet in the street. Oh my God.
Awkward. I was thinking about veils with eye contact.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got a woman required to wear a veil over her over her whole face,
Uh-huh.
as opposed to just the lower half. Something covering her eyes would make it harder for her to make eye contact,
Yeah, that's true.
which
Yeah.
is a control issue.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so
Even when I was a child, a lot of women's hats had a thin veil that came down to the nose. So
yeah,
it was very thin, you could see through it, but it covered the eyes and upper face.
right.
That was very common in the 50s.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, okay. I feel like I'm having thoughts here, but I'm having a hard time putting them together. I'm trying to look at some of the commonalities between the different aspects of this, because right now we're in the thick of this question of women's modesty and what it consists of, and who, for whose benefit it exists, right? You know.
I'm almost thinking, to some extent, especially veils, exist to protect the women. It actually protects the women from making eye contact. So it actually may benefit them. Whereas
I think it's both ways, right?
Yeah, whereas most other clothing forms of modesty are, well, they're still going to tell you it's to protect women from the male gaze, but
well, so
I think if you dig down to it, it's less about what women would choose.
Yeah, so
whereas something that that hides their eyes might very well give women the freedom to have facial expressions that would get them in trouble if the men saw.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
As opposed to Victorian, might get my time periods wrong, where modest is to lower your eyes, to turn your face away, demure look, which disconnects eye contact. The rest of your facial expression is still visible, but do what you want with your eyes as long as they're not looking, as they can't be seen by the viewer.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so yeah, through this whole thing there is the question of what does it mean, and I think honestly what it means depends on who's doing it and why they're doing it, right? Because I totally see how there's sort of these two extremes, right? There's very, very covered, and there's very, very uncovered. And the risk with very, very uncovered is sexualization. And the risk with very, very covered is if that wasn't your choice, right? It's a sort of like whether there's a power move being made over your bodily entity in order to keep it somehow from other people.
It's almost a male ownership thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Preventing other men from seeing this woman.
Yeah, because so there's a sort of a male ownership thing that's possible, right? I mean, it's one possible way to see that, but it's not the only possible way.
True.
And so what you get is it's very complex. These things just don't mean one thing, right? Because in a way, a guy, saying that you have to wear a bikini if you want to go to the beach is another form of ownership move where, the guy might expect you to show off your skin for him, to show off your skin generally, There might be body policing involved. So this kind of stuff is entangled no matter where you kind of connect with this. But I think at the same time, there also are situations on both sides where women are taking ownership of themselves and saying, you know, I choose to cover up because this is the way that I want to present myself, and I don't feel the need to show anything to anybody. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah.
And actually,
or this is my body, I should be able to show it if I want to.
In the Middle East areas, there's a very practical reason for covering up, which is the sunlight.
Exactly.
You don't want to expose a lot of bare skin. And even though you might be hot under the robes, you're not getting sunburned.
Yeah.
Right.
You're not going to find me topless at the beach, let me tell you.
Yeah.
I would get fried. It would be so painful. I can't even imagine. Yeah, exactly. So anyway, yeah. So there's a lot going on, and so I guess it's safe to say that when you see something, when you see a clothing statement, you can't guess what it means just by looking. Because there could be any number of different kinds of meanings that are being sought out by the person who is doing and making the statement. You know,
sometimes there'll be a situation if you have a very if the context is very homogeneous, if you're looking at you know, a place where the people all share a religion, so they all share religious practices, then you can. It's not good to be certain to say I'm certain of this, but you can come up with a probability of what the person is saying. Like, if she's saying, okay, I'm adhering to the tenets of my faith rules, that's what you're seeing, or I'm not. So that's something that you might guess, but if you're out where you're not looking at everybody has the same faith, then yeah, you know, you can't be sure, and making a guess can
right. And also, you know, I mean,
wrong.
Yeah, you could just be getting dressed in that because that's what all the cool girls are wearing these days.
Yeah.
You know. and it really doesn't have much to do with, you know, a personal statement necessarily. It's just that, you know, you're dressing like everybody who's your body and, you know, all that. I will remark, though, this isn't just a woman thing. Guys were not expected to take shirts off anywhere. And it was very risque until, like, I think the 1930s or 40s. That there were people who were guys who would go to the beach without a shirt, and it was considered scandalous. And then you had bunches of guys who would show up with no shirts and all this kind of stuff, right? And so by the time you hit the 1950s, as I understand it, it was pretty common practice for men to go without shirts. But before that, it hadn't been, you know. And so these modesty rules are not fixed, first of all. You know, they're constantly changing.
Skirt lengths.
Skirt length, right. You know, I love that line from the Pirates of Penzance, and suppose we take off our shoes and our stockings, and paddle, you know, like, yeah, man, that was risque, let me tell you. Bare feet, watch out. So, yeah, I guess it's all relative.
see if I can figure out how to make the screen share thing work. I was playing with it last week. Ow! Cat, stop it.
Ooh.
Jeez.
Are you okay?
Yes.
Okay.
There.
Is there blood?
Didn't work. Let me try again.
Oh. His plate is in the fridge with a little bit.
Okay. I don't know if that'll come up while I'm talking.
There you go.
Men. That's my father in a swimsuit, circa 1929.
Uh-huh.
And actually, there's a picture of my mother from the same occasion, and what she's wearing is very similar to what he's wearing.
Yeah, yeah.
So.
How cool, Glenda. Thanks for sharing that with us.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. So, so I guess what it means is if you're working in a fictional context, you can do all kinds of things with not only fashion, but also verbal, verbal kinds of things. I mean, if you're being modest verbally, I think the classic example of verbal modesty is when one receives a compliment. Right? What are you expected to do when you receive a compliment?
Yeah.
You're not supposed to go, oh, yeah, aren't I great? Right? You're supposed to, well, let's see, you're supposed to kind of deflect it somehow. So there's denial. Oh no, this whole thing, right? Deflection, which is be like, well, you're looking awfully nice today. Let's not talk about me. Or, some people actually will launch into lengthy self-denigration episodes, which I would find kind of awful.
Mm.
The other approach that I've heard to compliments is, and it's not considered immodest that I know about. It's where you kind of say something like, if somebody says, oh, I love your dress, for example, you could say something like, my mother gave it to me, and it's been a favorite of mine for so many years. Thank you for noticing. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's sort of an indirect deflection, I guess. You're acknowledging that it's special, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not saying, this isn't a great dress. But you're kind of transferring the gratitude onto something else.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
Right. So if you're in person, face to face, and that's verbal,
Mm-hmm.
Then you can also respond without speaking with the eyes or the smile or the blush or
Yeah.
the nonverbal. If there is no physical presence, I mean, you could also do that, as long as they're face to face and visual cues. But on Facebook, where it's just chat and there's no visual contact, the silent response isn't there. You can't use that because silence.
Because silence is like, I didn't hear you.
Yeah, I didn't hear you. What you said is not important.
Yeah.
We're left with those three things: denial, reflection, and acceptance.
Well, you can say thank you.
Yeah, that's a very simple thing that you can say.
I think thank
in
you
any situation.
Taught to foreigners, for example. but it's actually not the most sophisticated response to a compliment, in a sense. I think it's actually not that commonly used among native speakers. I'm thinking, you know, like how many contexts do I run into where people are, when I say, "Oh, you look great today," they'll say, "Thank you." Well, I mean, I suppose in some cases they'll start with "thank you," but they won't usually leave it there.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Because again, saying thank you sort of implies that the compliment was deserved.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's to some people it will feel a little bit immodest to just say thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, so it'd be interesting to sort of say, well, what, you know, could there be a society in which there was no modesty? And I actually wonder whether that's possible, because I would think that even if you took modesty out of all of the general categories that we use it in, surely it would crop up somewhere else.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like
it might look immodest from our perspective.
Right.
Because it doesn't have any of the types of modesty we would expect to see. But it would, if you really analyzed it, it would be in there somewhere.
Well, because if you are thinking of it as a response to power or a reluctance to challenge, then I think it would still exist in some form, but maybe not in the forms that we would recognize.
Yeah. Well, and also talking about verbal modesty, there's also the tooting your own horn.
Yeah.
Branding on yourself.
Self-aggrandizement. And that's a tough one for authors, isn't it? Because we're supposed to self-promote, but not self-aggrandize. And there we go. That's a tough one. Totally different type of question, right?
And at least in our society, more difficult for women than men generally.
Well, because women are expected not to challenge power.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now I'm like, what if we made a society where the rules of modesty were completely different? I'm gonna have.
Well, I mean, we're talking about some of those, you know, before the pictures and the risque pictures and you know, what parts of your body you're allowed to cover or you're required to cover. It's a different society. But yeah, I mean, if you could do something. Shoot, what was I thinking of? I lost it. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
But there was another in-person thing that I was thinking. You know, just the straight up thank you. But you can, again, if you're face to face, if you modify that with accompanying facial expressions or gestures, could that work in some cases as well as the extension, the denial, reflection,
right.
Yeah, even the tone of voice is a difference between thank you, yes, I do deserve that. Aw, shucks, thanks.
Yeah.
Yes. Aw, shucks.
Sorry, I'm a Southerner.
There is a quintessentially modest phrase. Aw, shucks. I'm going to write down aw, shucks. Oh, my goodness. Well, yeah. So, Well, okay, so I'm trying to think of some pockets of this topic that we might not have addressed yet, because I'm sure there's more there, but you know, my brain is kind of scattered today because of all the running around I've done. It's worth mentioning that eye contact is an issue between between cultures, and it can be very problematic. Because what can be considered modest in one place can be considered reticent in another place. What I'm
evasive or
evasive, right. So, for example, immigrants from Asia coming into the U.S. and trying to integrate into school situations where they will be expected to make eye contact with teachers and such. That can be really, really hard. A similar thing comes up when you're working with Native American Indian populations because of the eye contact rules there.
Yeah.
And it causes significant problems in schooling because of these very subconscious but very specific kinds of meanings that are transmitted by eye contact.
Look at me when I'm talking to you. Something I heard growing up.
Yep.
And
yeah.
Yeah.
And that can be difficult for, I don't know if this is the look at me when I'm talking to you thing. And this is aside from modesty. So I think, well, it can be very, very difficult for autistic people to maintain eye contact.
Yeah.
And that's not a matter of modesty or reticence or evasion. It's a matter of
overstimulation.
Focus on. Yeah. So, but knowing that versus saying this person is being, this is modest, or various people considering it. Is it modesty? Is it reticence? Is it evasive? Is it just plain rude because that person is ignoring you?
Or is it rude because they're staring you in the face?
Right. That's another thing. Is that happening? So knowing if you're dealing with a cultural thing or what's basically a personal issue, whether it's autism or something that is not cultural but is pertains to the individual, even if many individuals have that issue.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of something besides autism, and I'm not getting it.
Probably a variety of non-neurotypical conditions would happen, but like you, I can't think of anything offhand.
Yeah.
Well, Asperger's, but that's
right. That's
it's a similar kind of deal, but it's categorized slightly differently.
Social. Yes, social awkwardness. In as well, some of it's social awkwardness, some of it is just the sensitivity, the sensory overload, and I only want to. If you want me to hear what you're saying, you have to deal with me not looking at you.
Well,
see you have to deal with me not listening.
I noticed that when I'm in one-on-one conversations, I will typically look at a person that I'm speaking to, but not when I'm speaking to them. So when I'm speaking to them, generally I will look away, but when they're speaking, I will watch them.
Yeah.
Facial cues. You're looking for facial cues and paying attention when you're not looking at them. When you're talking, there are things going on in your head, and there's the things that you're supposed to be able to look at a person's face and say they're off. They're looking in this direction, they're thinking, they're looking in that direction, they're lying.
Right.
Are things that the person who is looking at you while you're speaking, is listening, is also taking in those things, even if they don't know the details of which is which. So, which may be why I have on occasion maintained eye contact with people who whom I'm speaking to or are speaking to me, and some people have found it apparently very disconcerting.
Like, yeah, I remember once I was in spelling bee, and I thought that I would be able to spell the word better if I just listened harder.
Well, that kind of ties into what I was just thinking of a reverse. If you're in a culture where people don't look directly at a speaker, if someone's hard of hearing.
Yeah. Yeah. Making sure that somebody's looking at you. Yeah.
Because they would be interpreted as staring in a rude way when all they're really trying to do is follow what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point.
And I'm now thinking of blind people.
Mm-hmm.
Are they, they can't see you, so in theory they don't actually have to be facing you or looking at you in order to understand what you're saying. But I imagine it can be, it can still feel to the speaker as though they're not paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
I would imagine. So I think I could be wrong because I don't spend a lot of time. I don't have any.
Yeah, that's an interesting question.
Physical life.
Yeah, I would guess that in our culture they're socialized to face towards the speaker, but
yeah, and that I wonder if that's part of the deal with the dark classes is they can't see that.
Well, they can't.
How?
Well, sometimes their eyes look unusual, and sometimes the dark glasses are there to say, "Well, you don't have to look at how unusual my eyes are."
And some people are not totally blind; they just have very, very limited vision.
Mm-hmm.
So the glasses might actually be there to protect their eyes from bright light.
Right.
Yeah. But I know that the way that we hold our faces is a little bit tangential, but the way that we hold our faces is learned. So the kind of facial expressions that we use at rest and various things like that are learned by watching other people.
Right.
And so people who have been non-sighted from birth will tend not to be able to execute the same types of facial expressions that we might expect.
Yeah.
Because they never were able to see them on other people and learn how those work.
Mm-hmm.
So, but, all right, we're at 3 minutes to 4, and I think I'm going to say we're done.
Okay.
You guys are great. Thank you for being here for me, even though I was late. Thank you to our viewer for being here and watching the show, even though I was late. And I have no idea what's going on next week, so I will figure it out sometime between now and next week. But I'm glad to be back to this, and I've got some more authors coming up in the next months, and yeah, things are looking good. So thank you so much for coming, and I'm going to stop the broadcast. Bye.